Today I'm going to share with you a personal story in the hope that talking about my decades of dealing with depression might shed some light on this very common disease and help show why mental illness shouldn't be considered any more shameful than diabetes or asthma or all sorts of other common chronic disorders. Briefly, here's the chronology. I was born in New York City into a modest middle-class family in the middle of the Great Depression and grew up in White Plains, a Westchester County suburb north of the city. My parents were both college graduates, and my mother even went to law school at a time when women didn't do that sort of thing. They valued education, and I was fortunate in that they made available for me a series of first-rate opportunities. So I spent 4 years at the Choate School in Wallingford, Connecticut, followed by Princeton, where I graduated with honors in psychology, and then on to Harvard Law School, but only after serving a couple of years as an officer in the U.S. Army. I was recruited right out of law school into a major Wall Street law firm where elevation to partnership was the single one-step path to professional success. And on May 1, 1968, I became a partner. I then spent years playing in the major leagues of finance and legal affairs, specializing in international dispute resolution, litigation, and negotiation. In my practice, I represented a variety of very prominent U.S. and foreign corporations and their senior management and some of their more challenging legal and financial problems. My practice made me financially secure, and while the hours were long and sometimes stressful and had minimal family time, I was supported throughout by my child bride and partner of over 60 years, as Jean and I raised 5 children in the commuter town of Chappaqua, New York, followed by 12 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, and now 2 more twin boys on the way. My legal career took off to heights I never could have imagined, resulting at one time in national acclaim, praise from the President of the United States and congressional committees, and being named the International Lawyer of the Year after it became public knowledge that I had spent a year conducting secret but government-authorized negotiations with Iran, leading to the release of the American hostages from the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, where they'd been held captive for over a year. Thank you. I retired at the peak of my legal career as a senior partner in a major international law firm and moved to the little hill town of Sullivan, New Hampshire, where unexpectedly I became involved in a second career rather quickly in the nonprofit sector, where I've served on or led a variety of social service and all sorts of other charitable organizations and local governmental committees. This latter day and still active engagement has also led to some gratifying local and statewide recognition and formal awards. Looking only at that brief outline, one might think that this is quite an enviable life journey. But it was also one impacted by mental illness and periods of alcohol abuse. As I look back now over these years in the context of the theme here today, I think I can identify a series of what you could call tipping points, all by some strange coincidence occurring on May 1. To begin with, I was born on May 1, 1934, and some 30-odd years later was elected to partnership in my law firm on May 1, 1968. While this was a pivotal career achievement, Within a year, I crashed and fell into an almost catatonic depression. My condition caused frightful pain and anxiety for my family, and when efforts to get me back on a road to recovery failed, on another May 1, 1969, I was placed into a locked ward of a New York mental hospital. And there I remained for a year with little promise of recovery. Behind those locked doors and windows, I lived in a mindless daze of aimless limbo, punctuated by almost 30 applications of the old-fashioned strap-down-on-the-table cuckoo's nest-style electroshock treatment. Finally, after a year with no apparent meaningful progress, my wife took things into her own hands. Jean had been consulting a psychiatrist as she and our 5 young children struggled to cope with my seeming endless absence. And Jean and the doctor managed to persuade the hospital to release me into their care and their sole responsibility. So the hospital people washed their hands of me, and on another May 1, 1970, a year to the day that I was put away, I finally emerged from that god-awful, dismal Gothic institution. I then began a steady climb out of the worst period of clinical depression that I had ever experienced. And within a year, I was able to start back at work at my law firm, which had been helping my family throughout my absence and supported me in my recovery. The early years consisted of traditional old-fashioned talk therapy. Prozac and all these other antidepressants weren't much in use in those days. But fortunately, an accidental factor in my recovery was a lifestyle change that remains part of our regular routine today. Without knowing what to expect, Jean and I got into the running craze just as it was taking off in the late 1970s. And we quickly became active race participants, including many full 26-mile marathons. We became firm believers in the theory that's now really pretty well accepted, if not proved, that running can have a positive beneficial effect on emotional condition, sometimes even referred to as the runner's high or the endorphin effect. Whatever the biochemical explanation may be, the fact is that doing it can make you feel good. And as most runners know, you miss it if you miss it. Running still helps, and together with all other factors, including modest but regular medication and other lifestyle practices such as yoga and meditation, led to unexpected levels of comfort, happiness, and extraordinary professional success. Now, I don't want to suggest that I consider myself fully cured. One of the common side effects of shock therapy is periodic impairment of short-term memory, and that only slowly abated in the early times, and sometimes I think that it's even present today, although Jean insists that it's no more virulent than the common puzzlement of people our age. What did I come into this room for? I think she's probably right, and these senior moments are just another aspect of what I prefer to think of as creeping maturity. More seriously, there are still some difficult times. But when darkness descends or the anxiety beast attacks, at least now I understand these problems better, and I have better tools to cope with them. Painful as my illness was for me and for those who loved and supported me, I came over time to realize that I'm simply subject to a chronic but very common and treatable disease. Recognizing that I'm stuck with this, I decided that I'll try to learn to live with it and to use the experience rather than have the experience use me. The irony of this story is that my illness and my recovery became positive influences and positive influence in both my personal and professional life. Living through those dreadful times changed my life. It changed my values and my priorities. And those changes led me to try to be more sensitive to the values and concerns of others. For example, back in the day when, in my professional life, I used to do a lot of negotiating, sometimes in difficult situations. For example, dealing with the Iranians during the hostage crisis. I think that my efforts at trying to understand and appreciate what's going on with the other guy, even if it's an adversary, were helpful. Just trying to discover what's important or difficult for others became a working priority for me. And it's still a work in progress today, and I need to keep at it constantly. My message today is obviously that mental illness need not be a barrier to happiness or success. And despite the stigma that still unfortunately prevails, mental illness doesn't have to preclude a productive and otherwise normal life, even if at times it's painful and sometimes seems hopeless. My own experience with depression is hardly unique or even unusual. The disease of depression has always been a common affliction and the experience of all sorts of people, including many well-known and legendary figures. For example, from Abraham Lincoln to Bruce Springsteen. To the extent that they're available, their stories of illness and recovery are informative and even inspiring. William Styron, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Sophie's Choice, and as some of you may know, who was a medalist over at the MacDowell Colony a couple of years ago, Styron, in his autobiography, referred to his depression as the wind of the wing of madness. Styron's book, Darkness Visible, a memoir of madness, describes his illness and recovery more eloquently than anything I've ever come across and read. And he concludes his personal story with a beautifully promising message. Depression is not the soul's annihilation. It is conquerable. And then he finishes by quoting Dante's allegorical image of recovery from darkness and despair at the end of the Inferno, when the narrator describes emerging from hell's black depths. And so we came forth and once again beheld the stars. And so we came forth and once again beheld the stars. Can you imagine a more beautiful and inspiring message of what it feels like to come out of a pit of depression and despair? Well, I obviously can't compete with Dante or Styron, and I don't have any fanciful names for my own condition, although I often refer to the Dark Ages when Jean and I talk about the past. My own struggle with the depression-anxiety complex has hardly been a walk in the park, but there's no doubt that it changed my life, and for the better. In closing, I'd ask that you take and help share the message that improvement in mental health needs to be a regional and national priority and requires public understanding that mental illness is just another serious but manageable disease that needs to be brought out of the closet, recognized, accepted without shame, and treated. It can be and it should be. And in my case, it has been. Thank you.